for the tape. Roll the VT. And then we'll have a look at, we ended with session 1 for those of you who are just joining us, with 3 very salient questions, which I will just deal with. So to summarize what was said in part 1, I underlined the fact that in your prepared discussion, that you were given a problem statement, that it was focusing on identifying aspects of literature, as in what is it about your choice of primary sources, and that I also underlined the fact that you could be looking at maybe what I would term exposition, setting, character, and conflict that seems to be universal to every scene, episode, chapter, book, image, television advert, advertising, billboard hoarding. I said then also you might want to think about what in terms of a story, which is an untouched sequence of events, a plot, which is when an author, a writer, a storyteller, a mediator, a director reorganizes a story to make it more effective. In my using literature approaches, I look at such things as using plot diagrams and classical plot structures, which you can see in adverts, which you can see in films, which you can see in books. To focus on this, excuse me, I need to cough. And then a perspective as well. So from what point of view you see the action. So you have both the organizing, telling, and showing of the film, text, book, play, etc., and the perspective, the point of view from which we can see it or we are told it. Those two are sort of very carefully intertwined or very closely linked. Thirdly, for me, when I look at cultural texts, I think about meaning. I quoted Krashen saying that all we're after is meaning in terms of language, and there I focus on motif, theme, and subject again, which you could see across your texts. Part 2 of your problem statement is the what and the why. What is it about that? Yes, in approaches to grammar, my written paper for the first 6 lectures, I reference 2 of Krashen's works. Alternatively, if you want to go to Google Scholar and put in Krashen, you'll get an overview of all his works, but you can look in my paper on approaches to grammar and vocabulary. I think both of them reference Krashen, and I go back to some of his initial papers right there. He's also referenced in the Munden and in most sources about communicative language teaching. Meaning, motif, theme, subject. Again, this is motif could be a piece of music, it could be a symbol, a rose, a dark figure, a wolf. It could be some words that you choose to repeat very often as well. In To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, the mockingbird itself, which is used in Hunger Games as the Mockingjay symbol, as a symbol of loss of innocence. The Mockingjay in Hunger Games, that sort of a symbol, that motif is turned into one of resistance by sort of attaching it to the mocking, to the jay, which is a very aggressive, territorial bird. But it's also stated as were in words in the theme in the book 2 or 3 times. Atticus Finch, who's also named after a bird, strangely, says to the children, it's all right to kill a jay, this sort of aggressive, defensive bird who's very territorial, but it's a sin to kill a mockingbird that's a songbird, and seems to symbolize sort of innocence, and that is then restated. And so not only the actual symbol of a bird, which is on the cover, but the words and the phrasing of it as well provides a motif that unlocks the themes, it structures the themes. That's a literary perspective. You really don't have to go as far as I go on those terms, but obviously themes are very useful in the classroom for thinking about contemporary issues and for discussion, because essentially that's what we want to know is about stories. We want to know, who are these people, character, the question being, who are you? Um, and which really doubles as a who am I? Because I project myself onto the protagonist. I root for them, I identify with them, I step into their shoes. So that who are you question, whether it's Macbeth, who are you, Macbeth, becomes also a who am I question. And that's, probably the core of drama, isn't it? And the other thing we look for really is, in answering that question, is meaning. Which are the themes which are linked to that question of who is this person? Once you've identified stuff about your primary sources, you want to think why they're useful in the classroom. And we have then for that the things that the course reading, my online lectures, additional material you've got access through, because you've had both Astrid's stuff and my stuff as well. So you've kind of had two concurrent courses going on there, and mine are also recorded as lectures, making me confident to give you these sort of run-throughs. This is the main focus for this term that have been brought up and is there in the course reading as well, is motivation, because reading is always about motivation. Reading and writing strategies. Using literature in the classroom has been my approach, and I've sort of brought that in for you a little bit if you've seen in my lectures, because I've had a focus on descriptive and narrative writing. We did using film and drama together, using music, songs and rhymes. I trust that the wonderful Mari did something in that direction with you as well. Cross-curricular learning, intercultural learning as well. So, which means when you submit your submission sheet saying what you're going to do, good review here, you are going to say, number one, choice of primary sources, text, and genres. What are you going to talk about? We had a very good question is, can I choose things off course? Yes, you can, but your primaries here need to be your most important ones that you take up first and that you will put most focus on. It's not bad if they are ones off the course, isn't it? But then you can then feel free to tie in other primary sources. You add those into your reference list. Primary sources. So make sure you prepare your examiner if you're going to talk about something by putting it in your topics and then putting it into your reference list, that's that little line there as well. Okay. And so let's say you want to talk about Gothic romance fiction and Wuthering Heights. You could tie it to, I would certainly want to tie it to maybe Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. If you were asking me what I'd do with it, first obvious thing that if I were going to do it as a sort of, for me, literary project, you don't have to, because those are maybe not books you're going to do in the classroom. I'd tie it to female New Gothic and Jane Eyre, and Northanger Abbey. Jane Austen would be your first go-to tie-in books, because they're the sort of the other predominant sort of romantic Gothic, New Gothic. It's called New Gothic or female Gothic for the 19th century, and that would be fine. But I'd have my primary source that was on the course as number one, and then those as additionals. Okay. And then you're going to have secondary sources, which is the issues you've chosen. They go into your reading list as well. And like I said, these are all in your course literature in Munden and Meyer and in Munden. In Munden and Meyer and Munden, they then, after every chapter, have to reference what they're using as their sources, and they include a lot of the stuff that I've pulled in or we've done during the term. From term 1 through to term 2, my material includes references. We've used Munden and Meyer from the start. I used Krashen directly in my first. I did 3 written papers for you as well, like a crazy person. I referenced Harmer and Anna Maria Pinter specifically as 2 very good sort of non-Norwegian theorists in this area and standard textbooks that you might use. I referenced Berketveit and Williams et al. In that, using literature in the ELT classroom book, and I used that specifically because Williams is also is a lecturer at York, so I thought that was an interesting tie-in. I've included other sort of references all the through. You can see that I've got handouts in English 2 methodology, and they include sections on cross-curricular learning where I use Dewey, John Dewey, as a sort of base reference, learning by Deweying, for values education, and a whole host of other references as well. So there's plenty there. If you're struggling to say, where do I get a reference from? Google Scholar. Anybody who's still alive and publishing will be in Google Scholar. So that's a really good go-to to find publications rather than scrabbling about on horrendous things like Wikipedia. Subnote while I'm there, take out Wikipedia references from any of your texts, please. Wikipedia is based on other sources. Use those other sources. Don't just say, I read it in Wikipedia. Yeesh. So that's part 1. And I'm just going to tie in here as well. So you should have, you submit to me beforehand so I can relay it to all examiners what you're doing, primary sources in order of importance, starting off with something from the course, absolutely, but I think it's very positive to branch out. Yes, and secondary sources, which is your why. What in your fiction, using your terminology for why in terms of educational methodology in the classroom. Notice the focus on the what and the why and not the how here, because we've done the practical application. And that presents you with a document that I'm not going to criticize, that should then go in, and let's have a look. Let's go to your syllabus. Go to your syllabus, boy. Oh, yes. And if we go down, I have popped it in. I'll be in London because I'm going to see BTS, the K-pop sensation, a seven-strong boy band from Korea, and I'm taking a group of teenage girls and chaperoning them. Ooh, goody! I'm going to be sort of, I'll be top off down the front going whoop whoop. Don't know any of their songs. So this is for me. It's is there under the oral submission. I'll make sure that you're allowed to. At the moment, you won't be able to submit. I will open that from today with an open place for submission. There we go. So you can just pop that in there as well. I'm going to try and avoid doing very traditional forms of printing everything out. Because surely we're past that, aren't we? I'd like to think so. Oh no, that was where I was, sorry. I was in there, wasn't I? Yes, that's what we're in on. Oral examination, description and submission. Then we had some very good questions about, can I relate it to, and I'm going to go back up to those questions as well. Hilda, I'm not sure if I'm going to come back to that question and quickly answer these ones whilst I'm here. So if you're desperate to then include in that document things for reference, but only reference, as in as you can see here, um, then that would be fine. So if I would limit the amount of stuff you start sticking in here as well. If there's like a diagram that you think is really useful. Oh, I've just come off of the screen, excuse me. If there's a diagram you think is really useful, that makes sense maybe. Do not attach like a PowerPoint as an appendix. That would be asking too much of your examiners. A picture, because it's important for reference, a picture of a cover of a book that's not on the course and that's not part of the course reading, that would be fine for reference. I don't want you, Ellie, and I don't want you bringing in books. But if it's important that you want to say, look at this cover, and it's not off the course reading, then I could see you potentially, you could also, if you want to, appendicize that to your submission. But again, potentially often this kind of stuff all gets printed out. Do you know what I mean? And my other examiners are quite traditional, so they might be hoping for like printing out of all of this stuff. And let's be honest, if you end up appendicizing loads of material, I'll be cursing your name. So if you're desperate, a cover of a book, you can bring it with you on the day and then ask, is it okay if I just bring this in because I just want to point to it? But we don't want to, the focus is on oral delivery. And if you're going to use something for support, as in, are you aware of this picture? Then there's just a point to it, isn't it, really? Not more than that. The focus needs to be on the point of oral contact, of discussion, because you're discussing something, aren't you? So we said about the parts as well that I said to you, why prepare yourself to just talk for 20 minutes and take control? I think that's an excellent policy. Even if they then want to, if an examiner at their discretion, it says in every part and in the examiners of GOVA, it's at their discretion. So if they feel they want to refocus you, that's up to the examiner. More or less, you will be given the first sort of 8 minutes to sort of talk freely. So that's the thing that you need to make sure you get through, is about 8 minutes, let's say. Regardless, if you're strong enough and on point, then and you can start branching out because you've got issues that you can touch on to show that you've or demonstrate that you've done well across the board. And then looking at Friday's question over here as well, is your examiners could then ask you about other texts and genres perhaps that you haven't covered, about other educational issues that you haven't covered. I'd see it as being quite easy to cover all of them if you wanted to. And of course, you've done your practical teaching and your practical applied assignments, which was on the one hand, adapt a text from the course for use in the classroom. I'm just going to underline that again. That was your task, wasn't it? Very important with that PT hand-in as well to remember. That's your task. It was adapt a text, and then the PT related to it was, how did that go? What have you learned from that? Reflection. And observe classroom practice was the second one, focusing either on teachers, students, materials, or a combination thereof. And then you're asked to write that up and invited to do that more in a sort of introduction method, what was done, results discussion, which is the other type of sort of the two writing models you'd use. Number one is kind of going to be the one we did last time, which is a juicy hamburger, introduction, conclusion, 3 points in the middle, which is what you do for expository or persuasive argument and exposition. And the second one is more of like pointing towards IMROD, which is more of a scientific paper where you've got data. And we can discuss that more as well as I go on to the PTs and submissions. So you can definitely use your experience to exemplify your whys. That's important. So if you say, what is it about this book? Well, I'm going to focus on, character, and perhaps if we look at the protagonist in fairy tales and picture books, um, we're then going to see how important that becomes. Perhaps if we're looking at Ye Shen for intercultural learning, identification with the protagonist, and that can help in terms of not only motivating students or pupils in the classroom, but it can also, obviously, it's effective because it helps in developing empathy for not only Indigenous peoples but other cultures, etc. For example, I observed, or for example, when we did in course requirement 1, we adapted a text. Yes, so there, definitely, why not bring it in? And as you can see, it's on your examiner's list as well of potential discussion subjects. Not everybody will talk for 20 minutes or will be, doing that kind of, or you might just sort of run out a little bit or lose steam. And then there will be questions about the literature, educational issues, and yes, we can even, a stock question might be to ask you about your course requirement and then relate it to what you've just discussed in it. So that answers Hades' question, could I put a picture as an appendix to that submission? Yes, that's fine. I would put it in your reference list as well then. So that would be my challenge to you. Reference your picture. You'd be able to find that I'd suggest just going to the OWL, the online writing lab at Purdue University, where they cover all forms of citation. Really good tool and resource. Heidi, I'm sure you've been there. Ellie, can we take the chosen books with us? If you bring it on the day, that's fine. I think maybe if you're going to rely on something, do not try and get sneak pictures in and then turn it into something it's not. That might upset your examiners. They might even resist that. You could put, if you really want to rely on a cover that's off course, then I could suggest that you could addend it to your submitted list of references for your examiners. But again, don't overload the system with stuff like that, okay? You've been asked for references for a particular reason, and I would try and stick to the format as much as possible. If a couple of things would be fine, but don't push it as well. Just think about the system overload if everybody starts doing that. Does the examiner know about the course requirements? Your lead examiner in this case is either Astrid or myself, so the answer to that is a full-on yes. I'm just covering all these pictures. Hang on a minute. Nursery rhyme seesaw, hurry up and down, which is the way to London town. Yes, of course I know that. You can reference it. Yes, it will be in a collection of nursery rhymes somewhere. Yes. You can choose what you want to, Celia. Get you. Choose what you want. You should choose what, in terms of choice for the exam, choose what you want to do. Yeah. Examiners love passion because they've been watching probably far too many talent and reality shows on TV. But it is true. When somebody comes into, I've done a lot of these now in the last 3 to 4 years. When somebody comes into the room and is excited about something, and can explain why something is, what it is, identify it, say why, and explain the theoretical grounds, and then even reference practical experience as an example. That's it's infectious, it's important, and it also will basically give you, it'll trigger a little effective filter, won't it, as well with examiners. Whether it's criterion reference or not, you doing what you want to do and showing passion for it will have an effect on an examiner. So you don't have to do what you did for PT1 and PT2 at all. In fact, you've sort of been asked to not do that, haven't you? So I'll probably make a note of what you did focus on. So I'll just draw attention to this as well. So you should, if you focused on a specific text for that, then it shouldn't be your main focus for your oral. That's important. So if you chose a fairy tale in PT1, and this is your question, isn't it, Celia? Let's say, and quite a few people did, Cinderella, Prince Cinders, Askeladden, which is an excellent choice. And obviously Cinderella for me it's Jane Eyre, it's Star Wars. There's something that unites that very simple rags to riches plot and story, because it's both story and plot, isn't it? In the Cinderella fairy tale, with massive sort of blockbusters. Perhaps you could even perhaps could I make so bold as to say that um, if you're watching Game of Thrones, then you may know nothing, Jon Snow. But to be honest, Jon Snow, bastard son taken into the Stark family, who ends up being Aegon Targaryen, Dragon Lord, and heir to the Seven Kingdoms. It's a classic Cinderella story. So you should be maybe focusing, if you focused on Cinderella there, then maybe you need to, as your main text, well, no, it says you're supposed to. Everybody knows that. Don't tell me you're saving that already. Oh God, did I just ruin it for everybody? Can I just say that Han Solo also died in the Star Wars films? Shit. So you've got the similar sort of story coming up, rags to riches. So if you chose Cinderella there as number one, then maybe you'd be looking to. Thank you. Yeah, duh. I know you've all seen it. Don't lie to try and make me feel bad. You need to shift your focus. That's important, and I'll have a look at that as well, maybe today, if you want to, in final session, as everybody completes the surveys, and then we can do any one-on-ones, or if you just want to sort of do a drop-in, look at my text, show me this, and what do you think? Or obviously, I'm doing feedback, and it's quite extensive as well. So if you need that focused in a sort of quick discussion, that's also positive. So on that note, I think that makes it quite clear. I think that's answered the questions. Hilda asked about guidance. I think what you mean is on the exam day, you'll come in and you'll be invited to take the lead and do part one, prepared discussion of text and issues that those texts then can help in exemplifying. You'll then, if at the examiner's discretion, if the examiner feels that maybe it's rambling or you need prompting, that will then be up to the examiner how that sort of naturally develops. Sometimes it's just organic. You go from one point to another, then because the examiner and examiners have different styles, might want to get involved in your dialogue and give you sort of be sort of part of what you're sort of saying, etc. So I think it can develop quite naturally. Let's have a look at, whilst we're there then, and we can connect that to your PTs. And I can give some general pointers here as well. So this is your basic task, isn't it? Adapt a text from this term's reading list for use in the English classroom. And it's the idea of adapting it as in how you're going to use it. And also what could be quite interesting here as well is what format you use, whether you use excerpts, intensive, extensive reading? How do you use film? Do you activate through song, through drama? There are issues perhaps of motivation. We're looking at choice, because it's about choice, not only your choice, but student pupil choice as well. And what kind of, obviously linking it back to the oral as well, what kind of opportunities then this sort of adaptation might engender, foster, promote in the classroom. Your course requirement was, of course, to working groups get a plan together, thinking about how you would adapt a text for use in the classroom. I know some of you used film, used song, used all sorts of different approaches. So you moved across formats, thinking about the text and culture aspect primarily, first of all. You drew up plans together, even though you might not even be teaching in the same school. And then were asked to sort of present those plans beforehand. Very important pointer for some of the texts that I will have given feedback is on again is then when you hand in something de facto afterwards, you do need to change that kind of text, and you're not talking about something that will be done in the future. You are talking about something that was done, and that was then going to be turned into portfolio text 1, where you've already taught the plan in your teaching placement. So teach plan. During teaching placement, submit plan, and reflection on outcomes, and turn that into a formal expository persuasive writing text, exactly the kind of text we did last term, where we either explained something or we argued for a position that a specific book, the last picture book, for example, was useful in the classroom. And then I included things that you can obviously discuss about, is you can think about, whether your learning objectives, then thinking in reflection of how it went, whether they would be changed or shifted, whether your lesson plans, whether you would change or do something different with that. You might want to refer to, you're asked to bring in some competence aims and basic skills. As we're talking about texts, reading strategies, but could also be watching strategies. Everything goes into this. That's a TBL thing, isn't it, for me? A pre, task, and post. Thinking about assessment for learning, and of course, theoretical support for your choices. And whether they were correct or not, or whether you changed them or what you learned from them. So I do understand at this point that maybe it wasn't made, or we've got different results. Some people have just hit the money on the nail on the head with this, which is you can just submit your plan or whatever you did for course requirement as an appendix, really. And here then you could look at, you're assessing how the adaptation of a text went, whatever it was, and that gives you a chance to just follow the hamburger, juicy burger model, where you have an introduction, a conclusion, and in the middle you're going to look at, you divide your material into, like an exposition or a piece of persuasive writing, you divide your material into 3 classically aspects, which is your melted cheese, your vegetarian halloumi burger, or perhaps a vegan patty right there in the middle, obviously, because you're down with the times, aren't you? And perhaps some sort of sauce. Fried onions for me is a must in a good burger. And so you'd have an introduction, 3 things in terms that you're going to focus on in terms of outcomes from how it went, what worked, what didn't work, what you might change, what you might keep, expected outcomes, unexpected outcomes, You might focus on whether the learning objectives might need to be changed, whether lesson plans might to be changed, whether you could include different competence aims or focus on different skills, whether there might be changes or things that you've learnt about strategies for reading, using films or formats pre, while, and post, whether assessment for learning, what you learned or in terms of plan contra what actually happened, and whether maybe your theoretical choices and support for your choices have also changed. You could also consider whether aspects of motivation, whether you thought you were using certain methodologies, but maybe you found other things were more successful. Obviously, you plan, but a good classroom, particularly thinking about LK20, is going to have to be, if you're going to achieve deep learning, and it's going to be there through the entire curriculum, deep learning requires open-endedness, doesn't it? It requires choice, learner autonomy, and it requires interdisciplinarity, which requires thematic division of material as well, if you're going to go across different disciplines. But you have to allow learners a degree of autonomy. They have to make choices, and they need time as well to do this, which means the plan always has to change. And so in reflection, a good reflection should mirror the fact that things weren't as planned, because otherwise there is no deep learning. If things go according to plan every time and everybody does what's expected, that isn't deep learning. That's the opposite of deep learning. So it should be a positive. So for me, this is an obvious text where you could use the basic hamburger model: conclusion, 3 body sections, introduction, 3 body sections, conclusion, and really pick out and highlight the things that came out that you learned from the experience. For me, that would be, and some people have said, should I rewrite it? Yada, yada. That would, for me, be the ultimate way of doing this, that's implicit here as well in producing this text. What did I learn about adapting a text from this reading list? It might have been never to use that specific text ever again. Who knows? That would be fine. It might be use of authentic texts. It could be how to mix extensive and intensive reading. It could be how effective use of drama might be, or song, particularly in increasing motivation. Lots of people wrote about reticence as an issue, the idea that there were reluctant speakers, or there was a degree of what we call reticence as a sort of as a phenomenon as well. Now, a lot of these could be due to entrenched teaching practices, where teachers maybe don't use English as a primary sort of language of instruction, or constantly translate everything, so students feel that they don't really need to speak English in the same way, or perhaps just learn to devalue English if Norwegian translation is always required for things to work. That's like a security sort of blanket which needs to be taken away, obviously. And this is something that you could link to your PT1, PT2 as well, because lots of you observed things like this in different classrooms, and that can have incredibly different outcomes. So this is a hamburger model for me if you're going to write it as an academic text. You could include a description of method, but I would always advise you, if you've got a description of what you did, that you then pick out sections from that, making sure it's in the past and past passive, and use those to exemplify your aspects, your 3 main areas that you think you've learned something about in your reflection. Because a lot of you wrote very good descriptions of what was going on, and then linked how you chose stuff to a theory from Munden et al., which was excellent. I would use that and just reorganize it and say, one of my reflections on outcome is that, perhaps I need to work more on assessment for learning. I remember somebody said that, giving them, when we did use it, it was very effective. It also sort of increases learner autonomy, doesn't it, and learning to learn. And then there were issues of whether you do that in Norwegian or English, etc. If that's your area, then you can take items from your description and use them to exemplify and bring in your discussion of sources for why you do that, and if anything has changed at that point. So that's my overall view of PT1, of how it would be produced as a text. You don't have to follow the model. Hey, this is deep learning. I'm just saying that would be a go-to. You could also introduce and in your introduction include a brief description of what was done, which could be, then appendicized as a plan if you wanted to. Then go into a discussion and then conclusion. But the focus should be on reflection on outcomes, as in what was the outcome. That's fine to present that, and was it expected? Was it unexpected? What have you learned from it? Which is looking at a why as well. PT2, and there's last session today, because I'm going to end up here at about 11, and the last session today is everybody completes the survey, and people can then also, maybe starting with people who've already done the survey, thank you very much. It means a lot to me. It's quite important, and I think for the group, I think it'll be awesome as well, because we'll get published. So do apply peer pressure to everybody. Then you can come and you can ask me questions here as well. Everybody can send in both their texts. I've now committed to doing this however much time it takes, so I'm gonna make sure that you all get feedback, and it's all in commentary form. I'm afraid it's no stars, all wishes, but that's because I need to be effective at this point, as I get swamped. In task, in course requirement 2, which becomes portfolio text 2, again, you've been asked to go into the classroom and observe stuff. And I think lots of you have done this really, really well. Seen lots of great stuff out there, because it is just an invitation to observe and then structure your material. There's your task. Basically assess, observe and discuss your observations based on really the pronunciation and world language theme, as in, so how is pronunciation practiced with an S in the classroom? And look at that as well. If you wanted to do the juicy hamburger, you'd be able to do an introduction where you talked about the task, set up your problem statement, context, and then maybe if you wanted to do something about method, it could be very quick here, because you don't need a massive description of method here, do you? You went into a classroom and observed. You were an observer. You can refer to yourself as an observer. And then I actually gave you 3 aspects. Look, so if you were going to do juicy burger, I'd actually already in the task, because there it is, given you teachers, pupils, teaching materials, which would be a natural way of looking at how these 3 things affect pronunciation in the classroom. So you go through course requirement, which was to observe, task with written basis. I think the wonderful Mari gave you time to work on this, and then you went into seminars and discussed, and it was a chance to get sort of like compare maybe experiences. You recorded and uploaded to Google Drive. So that was all fantastic. Then leaves you with a write up your group observations, collate data where possible, write up, submit paper individually based on the group data. So the invitation there was to observe, You could focus on one of three. You could focus on all three and divide naturally any discussion into those areas. And then Cheeky Charlie introduced what would be important for English 3 and English 4, which is the IMROD writing model, introduction, methods, results and discussion. And results and discussion could be together. Here's a result and here's the discussion of it. Refer to the secondary sources and theory. So the invitation here is to not do the juicy burger, but to do introduction, method, results and discussion. But let's make this really clear. Juicy burger matches or can match that, because your introduction and method could be just your introduction in your burger style. Your results and discussion could be your 3 sets of observations or foci, I could say, or even foci. They're both actual possible pronunciations. Foci, foci. Ask Mari about it. That's quite difficult though. You could have just observed and said, let's look at teachers, let's look at pupils, let's look at teaching materials. You could have observed lingua franca, or looking at how English was presented. Is it taught as a second language, as a foreign language or second language? Lots of people looked at that focus. You could provide your own, obviously it should be based on your own observations there. And that would be your 3 fillings of the juicy burger, wouldn't it? And some of you did that very well. You know, they just pointed out, here's an observation, here's observation 2, there's a third observation. Lovely. And then conclude by saying, you know, what your question was in the beginning, what points you've covered in your text, and evaluating or what was learned out of it. So this expository persuasive style writing, you could have done IMROD, but IMROD can also, because there's a crossover between these types of papers, can also fit very nicely into a juicy burger. So that's quite easy to do as well. And I've seen that people have done both solutions. They're all excellent. Okay. And so, you know, a simple layup could be introduction, setting out what you're doing, any method that you need to just quickly and very briefly go through. You could then just look at teachers, pupils, and materials. And I know some of you have done that in each section, an observation, a discussion of that observation, relation to theory in that discussion as well. Yeah. And then conclusion, restate what you were doing and the question that was asked, because there's always a question, isn't there? Problem statement, thesis statement. Say what you did and evaluate at the end. And you know, conclusions are always open, aren't they? They're always a qualified conclusion. You can't really ever say anything for sure, because scientific method presupposes that whatever you say now will be wrong later. That's what being scientific means. Being wrong. It means you're wrong. And just to hook back to my spoiler from earlier, that's possibly what is so compelling and persuasive about fantasy in a world that's sort of dominated by science and scientific approaches. Because in a scientific approach, there is no end. You are always wrong. There's no dramatic plot structure. It's all purely episodic, happening again and again and again. And every point at which you're correct, or you think you're correct in a scientific approach, is always going to be proved wrong. Fantasy, Game of Thrones, offers something very different. It offers an end. It offers the chance to be right, to be good, and for there to be an end in a dramatic plot structure, which is pretty much where I should be right now, I'd say. in the midst of the shame of a potential terrible plot spoiler from me. So those are the two texts, portfolio text, with some clear general guidelines. They're both texts that are written after doing the course requirement, okay? So everything's in, in the past tense, make sure of that as well. Not when you discuss books, that's in the present. So everything from last term applies. When I've given you model language and self-assessment tools, they are actually from English 3. So they're above and beyond the call of duty, but I know there are people out there who've done BAs, and so what I've done is I have handed or sort of included, look, there's all the methodology in that list in one slideshow. There's Charles Keeling, TM trademarks, using literature. That's my approach, descriptive and narrative writing, I'm calling it there. Got a rating scales. I do have a scientific and literary paper. So there are guidelines to, this one is really looking at talking about a book as a primary source, using quotations, textual evidence, like by summarizing or paraphrasing or quoting. But again, this is for English 3 and 4. It's actually from English 4. So that would have been potentially for next year or the following year. There's a scientific paper as well. They all include a ton of model language as well. So if you're thinking, have a look at that, and some of them have even got great pictures from Studio Ghibli films. What else could you want? But it does, if you need as well, it takes you through what you do in introduction. So you don't have to do all of this, but it can help you with sample sentences. I think it's when it gets back here as well. I actually have included and doctored to a degree the types of sentences you get in introductions when you establish the importance of a topic in a time frame, types of sentences. One of the most important events of the 2000s, highlighting a problem. So I've even done that as well. Let's have a look. Concerns have been raised by several relevant bodies. One of the most significant current discussions in education is, that's a good line to use, isn't it? Boom. One major issue that has dominated the field, woof, highlighting, and again, I've given you more as well. Too little attention has been paid to motivation in the classroom or reading strategies, and so there's quite a lot of sort of, these are for a sort of an IMROD paper. This paper will focus on, do go in and have a look at these as well, because you've got a chance here to outline structure. I've commented on this as well quite a few times. You can add these. This essay has been organized in the following way. The first section will examine, these are sort of longer ones, but you've also got the main issues addressed in this paper are A, B, and C. This paper's been divided into 4 parts. 3, please. I'm saying Imrod because it's a cool name. Imrud is the actual Swedish. It's Imrad, isn't it, in English with an and. Do apologize for that. Spirited Away, fantastic film. What does it even mean? So you've got your sessions there, sections, method. I don't need an extensive method section for any of this. But there's loads of language in there as well. And you can use this as well. This is something you might want to download anyway for future reference. Why would you want to do that? Because I will not be working here anymore, or I'm not sure at what capacity I'll be working at USN anymore, because I can end this section as well by saying that all these will be legacy material, because as we go to a break, both Mari and I have actually been released from our contracts. So you've probably got The Last of Us. Of course you would. They're fantastic. So I can see some of you have used these. These could be useful, particularly maybe you need to do it in a group as well. I have given you things that maybe you can have a look at. Don't be shy. If you want to just copy stuff, some of the, look, if so, reference to a method. If you want to use some of these sentences, these are about showing figures. If you want to have charts, you could addend a plan if you wanted to. Anyway, it's a full-on guide all the way through there as well. And it's not just, to be honest, though, it could be used even for English speakers writing BA theses, all the way through to, is it millions of pages of it, right the way through to conclusions. Astrid doesn't work for USN. She's on a sort of an hours contract. She works at Agder, where she has a full-time contract, though again, just on a yearly basis. And this is how, sadly, universities work. They keep a limited core staff. So both Mari and I, you were our last group, to be honest. I'm very happy that I got Mari for the 4 lessons I couldn't take you for, because I feel that you got a like-for-like replacement, and Mari and I are going to be working on an article together, hopefully to be published soon. I'll let you all know, but we're just looking at using narrative games, video gaming in the classroom. And so if you're interested in being included in that, we're going to be looking at the potential in using narrative gaming as literature in the classroom, because it's something that I've really wanted to do. I don't know who will benefit from this, but we'll find out. Yes, I will be potentially, there's a plus side to that story. Thank you very much for your kind words. The potential plus side to that story is that I have been asked to apply for a job at Nord Universitet. I have to say in Swedish, sorry. Which is up that way. Yes, exactly. They need somebody to teach literature and cultural studies, which is actually my specialization and subjects. So there's the potential. I don't know. Nothing is a given in this world, that I might be heading further north rather than staying down south, which is nasty and full of horrible southerners who are all self-obsessed and constantly looking at their phones. I mean, God. You've written Whores of the North. You've written Whores of the North. Yes, but still Whores of the North. Why not? Indeed. Definitely North at Bloody Wall. I'm actually Horse in the North, to get the reference right, on Facebook. So do add me on Facebook, LinkedIn, please. I may well be moving further north because the people are simply just better and more trustworthy. At the moment, down in King's Landing, I'd have to say that quite a few of us we were just sent letters, anonymous letters, saying thank you for your time. We won't be needing you anymore. So it's a nasty world down here. But on the other hand, let's face it, a bit like King's Landing, the brothels are pretty good. So what we'll do there is we're going to take a 15-minute break. Exactly. But with Starks, that's who we all are rooting for. And however simple it is, that's who we root for as the protagonists. So let's take a break there till 11:25. Okay, 15 minutes, and then when we come back, I would like, I'm going to stop the recording there as well. I'd like everybody to take the time to complete the survey, please. Now that I've put that bombshell on you, really, really important. It's so important because it will get this course into posterity, because we'll publish and I'll be writing that. And so we'll get a really good basis and we'll get something out of this. We'll all be in there, which is, I think it's going to be really good fun. At the